Edgar Allan Poe is out here talking about another dead woman. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. And today I have another fun, strange story for you. Today's story is a short story because it is Short Story Tuesday, and we are also in the month of October, otherwise known as October, otherwise known as Spooktober, so now we can start discussing spooky short stories, which I always love. I enjoy talking about them outside of October, but, it's always good to have a theme for a month. So going this month, scary short stories, maybe even scary poems as well. We'll see where what we can find. And today's short story is all about a dead wife that might be haunting your home and killing your the woman that you're about to marry or you have married. I am referring to Ligeia, which was written by Edgar Allan Poe and published around 1838. I've talked about Edgar Allan Poe on this channel before, a very well-known author in Western cultures. He was known for writing gothic and spookier stories, including The Raven, The Pit, and The Pendulum, and the cat, the Black Cat, and many other stories, including The Cask of Amontillado, which I think I talked about last year. Just a lot of really fun stories, ones that are very well ingrained into Western culture. And he's a very fun author to talk about, although he did not lead a fun life. He had a lot of troubles that he dealt with. And he had a very short end and whatnot, so not a lot of fun. Even after the fact, we're talking about his work, so even if he didn't experience that great of success in his time, at least he's well known afterwards, which is probably not any solace to him given that he's dead. But without further ado, let's talk about Ligeia. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Ligeia focuses on an unnamed narrator who is initially married to a woman named Ligeia. And we really see him describing Ligeia after she's dead. He's very obsessed with talking about how she looks, very focused on this woman, talking about her eyes in particular, her nose, her facial features. Very hyper-focused on that sort of thing, not really noting too much about her personality and the process. But Ligeia eventually dies, but before she dies, the narrator is talking to her on her deathbed, and she writes a poem that she has the narrator read about what comes with death, including talking about shadows and dark sorts of creatures and the conqueror worm who will claim us all. And especially noting that people only die because they lose the will to live, and apparently the thing that keeps you alive is sheer willpower alone, which is certainly a way to view existence. And at that point, Ligeia seems to die. The narrator is sad, but a short while later they seem to get remarried to another woman named Lady Rowena, who they don't seem to have that great of a relationship. Lady Rowena is a bit uncaring about being married, doesn't seem to love the narrator, which upsets the narrator. And to make matters worse, Rowena falls ill. And is kind of on her deathbed and only months after they get married. And the narrator is kind of dealing with all of this by using copious amounts of opium, staying high. And so they even acknowledge they don't really know what's going on as Lady Rowena seems to die. And the narrator just sort of stays in the bed with Lady Rowena as the house servants kind of prepare the tomb for Lady Rowena. And as they're lying in the bed with Lady Rowena, they see a transformation seem to take place, where it seems like Lady Rowena comes back to life and then dies, comes back to life and then goes away again. And again, this might have something to do with the fact that the narrator is high. But as the story comes to a close, they find like a great shock to themselves as they see Lady Rowena, and they realize that she's been transformed into Ligeia, who might have been haunting this home, this bedchamber, this entire time. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with Ligeia. It's very spooky, which you find with most Poe stories. And as with most Poe stories, you see him utilizing Gothic writing, or like utilizing a Gothic atmosphere in his story. Poe focuses on quite a bit of death and horror. You especially see that with the death of both wives in this story. Ligeia, who is on her deathbed, writes a really creepy poem about a conqueror worm, about how we're all food for this worm, and how there's shadows watching us from afar. Very, very unsettling. And then Lady Rowena also proceeds to die, and based on what it feels like in the room, the narrator thinks that Ligeia might have something to do with it. And so there's just like this spooky feeling, and there's deaths taking place here as well. And even the home that they're in is written in such a way, is described in a way that utilizes the Gothic tone. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. To one entering the room, they bore the appearance of simple monstrosities, but upon a farther advance, this appearance gradually departed, and step by step, as the visitor moved his station in the chamber, he saw himself surrounded by an endless succession of the ghastly forms which belong to the superstition of the Norman, or arise in the guilty slumbers of the monk. The phantasmagoric effect was vastly heightened by the artificial introduction of a strong, continual current of wind behind the draperies, giving a hideous and uneasy animation to the whole. And that's a really good quote, just getting at the spooky sort of atmosphere in this room that they're in, which has like a strange wind that might feel like ghostly in nature, and just surrounded by figures, art on the walls that refer to various superstitions. Why would you be in such a room? Only characters in Poe stories seem to be there. Also, people in the 1800s weren't exactly the most sane at times. So you really get the feeling for how creepy this room is, and to make things even more sinister, you have the narrator lying in the bed of a dead woman. She's dead, they're waiting to bury her, and he's just lying there because he can't deal with the fact that his second wife has died. And this all really highlights Poe's inherent sort of lament about dead women. Sort of, he experienced death in his own life of his loved ones, and so that's kind of all he could really focus about in his writings. You see that here, but you also see that in like the portrait or the Raven, with like the main character hyper focusing on like a word that the Raven is saying and believing it to be like the Raven taunting him about his lost Lenore. And here, like the narrator believes that this woman who died is transforming into his ex-wife, and also that his ex-wife's ghost is in the room and made this death happen in the first place. It's all very, Gothic, spooky, like horror-centric. So you really get that feel for the sadness that is overall present in all of this. And referring to the sadness, you see a lot of grief in this story. The narrator is extremely sad about Ligeia. Even after remarrying, they seem to be sad. And maybe that's why his new wife doesn't quite love him so much, that she's a bit distant, is because maybe he's talking about Ligeia so much, or she can see that his mind is in another place, and maybe he's just remarrying so that he has a wife and a station and all sorts of things like that. But you can see how sad you would be if two of your wives died, and how you might be succumbing to madness. And in fact, I think that's what's happening at the end of the story. Rather than Ligeia being, or like Lady Rowena being transformed into Ligeia, the narrator's just succumbing to madness. They have lost it after two of their wives have died, and they're not in the best state, and so they're having a break with reality. And similar to many Poe stories, you see an unreliable narrator here, where like the narrator acknowledges several reasons why their story isn't really to be trusted. Like you could view this literally as a ghost story, with someone being transformed after death into their loved one. Or into a former loved one. But in reality, I think something terrifying is happening to the narrator here. You could argue that they've fallen into a sort of opium hallucination, where like they've smoked so much opium as a way to deal with the sadness that they're feeling as an escape, that their wife has died, if they even got remarried in the first place, and they're just imagining that Lady Rowena is transforming, even though that's not actually happening here. You could view it as madness. Again, Lady Rowena has died. That's reminding you of Ligeia, and so now your mind is just having it set. So surely there must have been a ghost present that's initiating this change. It could also be the fact that the narrator maybe murdered his first wife and it has subsequently murdered his second wife. He's not doing the best job to hide it, but Poe has written before about sort of main characters, protagonists, who haven't been in the right state of mind and have committed murders. So that could be more of what's happening here. It could be a hallucination brought on by grief, or it could be an act of dreaming where the narrator has gotten married, and on the first week of their marriage, they've fallen into a dreamlike state. They fell asleep and they imagined that their new wife, who has been sick recently, is to die soon. It does feel somewhat dreamlike, someone transforming into another person. So you could argue that's maybe happening here. And ultimately, what I think Poe is maybe getting at is how we can create our own horrors. That maybe no one has actually died here, and that we're sort of imagining a world like this. That we're kind of like leaning into our previous insecurities, our previous sadness, to create a new horror, imagining a new world that is more horrifying than what has come before. It's pretty terrifying, and it shows like Poe is highlighting the psychological horror that exists rather than maybe a physical horror that's happening. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Ligeia by Edgar Allan Poe. A pretty solid short story, as most Poe's short stories are. I feel like there's a reason why this one is lesser known. It can be a bit difficult to get into, especially with the very verbose writing and over-reliance, I think, on Greek mythological tropes and history like that. Whereas the other ones are a bit easier to get into because they're lighter on that stuff. This one is more in-depth on that. And Poe just goes on and on and on, which doesn't have as much flow as maybe the Pendulum or the Cask of Amontillado. So it's still a pretty good short story, and I highly recommend it, and I'll put a link to it in the description. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you and possibly have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Poe if they don't already know, as well as the short story, which people might not be as familiar with as, say, his other short stories. Also join the Discord, which is linked to in the description below if you want to have further conversations about books, movies, or other sorts of things. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and ghostly travels. Farewell.